Long time no see, Internet. We are back with our regularly scheduled LCS and LEC games, so that means it's time to recap all the patches that have hit the Rift since then. As a quick reminder, playoffs were on patch 10.6, and today we're talking about 10.11. For those who read patch notes like we're in decimal, it's like we went back in time. But for reals, we've got 5 patches to cover, so let's get started. To quickly recap the 10.6 meta, let's talk about top lane, where Set and Ornn ran the show. In the jungle, we had quite a bit more diversity, but the top picks were Jarvan, Trundle, and Olaf. In the mid lane, LeBlanc, Azir, and Zoe were the top picks, and you know, I always hope that Zoe wins. I'm a Zoe mania, and she's just so fun. People get so trolled by the bubble, and her voice lines are so cute. Like when she sings about chocolate cake, she's super random, but also smarter than she looks, just like me. Now, bot lane was really about Aphelios, Kalista, and Varus. Misfortune showed up a bit as well, but the role was way more concentrated on its picks than most of the other roles. Finally, support was pretty varied, but the most highly sought after were Senna and Thresh. Now let's catch up to the modern day. As of 10.8, late game jungle camps are worth more experience, and as of 10.11, most marksmen have more health. There's also been around 60 individual champion changes beyond what we just mentioned, and we're going to go into some of those because going over every single one seems like a bit much. So Ornn and Set are still the biggest top laners, but the Wukong rework from 10.6 has joined the pro roster as arguably the number 3 pick in the role right now. He's a high armor, initiating frontliner who builds hybrid offense-defense items like Death's Dance, Black Cleaver, and Steric's Gauge. The biggest thing to look for in the new look Wukong is that you can use his ultimate twice per cooldown, giving him a bunch more crowd control, and is, in my opinion, the reason why we're going to see much more of him now. A quick mention also goes to the fairly large damage nerf on Set's Haymaker, which dropped him below Ornn in priority. One day we'll get Ornn nerfs, maybe. Trundle and Graves now dominate the jungle pool, with Nidalee close behind. Trundle is the last tank left over after the 10.8 jungle changes, while Graves and Nidalee are excited to be in a game state that favors late-game farming. Nidalee also got a direct buff to her late-game javelin toss damage, and I suppose now it's actually time to break down those jungle changes. So a few months ago, we talked about faster respawn times, but lower individual rewards on jungle camps, and those changes are going to favor going back to your jungle and farming it. Well, 10.8 put in another change that furthered that reward. Jungle camps are, and kind of always have been, worth a set amount of gold no matter when you kill the camp, but the experience reward scales up over time, and Riot made that late game jungle XP even higher. So here's a look at how much experience each late game camp is worth to a jungler before and after those changes. It's about 6% more experience for the whole camp, which is 10 to 18 EXP, or 50 more XP on a full buffless clear. Now, this XP bonus kicks in when the average champion is level 9 or higher. So let's use that as a frame of reference. That 50 XP is 10% of the XP gained by solo killing a level 9 champion, or 5% of the XP required to go from level 9 to 10. It's honestly not that much. I also want to point out this change only happens once the average level is 9. So that only really comes into play 15 minutes into the game. Now, it's not to say this change is nothing. Small gains like these add up. But when someone says that Graves is OP because the jungle XP buffs, you're only 12 minutes into the game, yeah, those XP changes haven't happened yet, and they're lying to you. Now, Fiddlesticks is probably not going to dominate the meta anytime soon, but his rework is enabled for pro play as well, and does fill in as a mage jungler who's seeing more play than either Karthus or Gragas. Certainly has to wait in line behind Nidalee, but is a viable jungler. Let's move on to the mid lane. Syndra has quickly risen from the number 4 pick in the role to number 1. Otherwise, there haven't really been meaningful direct changes to mid laners, so the rest of the cast is still there. It's worth noting that 10.11 saw a decent nerf to Syndra's stun cooldown, but that hasn't stopped teams from picking her up almost every time they can. And heck, she can get flexed to bot lane, so she's often first pick worthy. Now, Varus is actually the top dog of League of Legends overall. Now, his nerfs, or further nerfs, I should say, are coming soon. But where he was the number 3 pick in the role, he is now number 1 in the game. 10.8 had nerfs to Callista and Aphelios, and those nerfs were much larger than Varus' nerfs, so he's been rising up. Back on the street. He did his time, took his chances. He went the distance, now he's back on his feet. Just 2 men fused with a demon to survive. Now, Ezreal also rose the ranks due to those nerfs, but Aphelios and Callista are still top 4 in the role. Now, honorable mention goes out to the fact that Senna support is still a thing, and that Maokai has become one of the go-to tanks when picking up the farming role in that lane. I also want to spend a bit of time diving into the marksman health changes in 10.11. Here's a look at the average health before and after of the 14 affected champions. It's 30 more health at level 1 and 64 health more at level 18. Now, for a difference of 6 to 3%, it's certainly not massive, but when you compare it to other marksmen who didn't get this buff, like Lucian, you saw a comparative win rate increase of about 2%, which is pretty big. 2% win rate bump for 14 champions means those 14 champions going to get a lot more play compared to their cohorts. Now, some of the sentiment I've been seeing online is that marksmen are uniquely underpowered because they're too squishy. Now, realistically, this isn't true. Marksmen are actually more durable than comparable mages. Marksmen tend to have more health and armor than their mage counterparts and have the same magic resist. Now, we'll continue to see very few mages down in the bottom lane, mostly the occasional Syndra, because that highly prized first pick can occasionally be flexed away from a bad mid lane matchup. But 98% of the time, it's going to be marksman down there. Now, last but certainly not least is support. And we can talk about that really briefly. Senna got a very small nerf that reduced the number of souls dropped from minions by 10%, while leaving those dropped by champions and monsters untouched. This, along with player tendencies, has dropped her from number 1 to number 5 in the support role. Thresh took her spot at number 1, which feels very thematically fitting. Nautilus moved up a spot as well and remains popular. Now, some leagues around the world are falling back in love with Yuumi as the go-to enchanter support, so we may see her poke around as well, but otherwise it's a lot of tanks down there. Now that covers the big expectations of the patch, so I want to leave you with one more bit of info. Here's a list of champions who got small buffs over the last 5 patches whom I expect to see play over the next few weeks of games. Kali, Cho'Gath, Gnar, Aurelia, Corki, Galio, Lissandra, Lux, Orianna, Ryze, Twisted Fate, Ashe, Kai'Sa, and Soraka. Everyone else who might shake up the meta, I think, has already been discovered. See you next time for patch 10.12.